What would you do if you were the only human at an alien university and your professor started a lecture about how your ancestors were basically mindless, spaceship-eating monsters? Alden Renner was about to find out, and trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next. He was slumped in the front row of a massive lecture hall that looked like it was carved from the bones of some colossal beast, fighting a losing battle with sleep. He'd made the classic rookie mistake of picking a front row seat on the first day, and now he was stuck there, forced to look interested in the specks of dust swirling in the projector's beam. The course was Xenohistory 301, Evolutionary Dead Ends and Collapsed Civilizations. It was the only class that fit his schedule, and his advisor had sworn it would be an easy A. That turned out to be a complete lie. At the podium, Professor Vrigg, who resembled a giant walking chunk of petrified wood, droned on and on. His voice was a low hum that vibrated in Alden's teeth. Instead of a face, glowing filaments drifted from his polished head, and his eyes were just deep, amber-colored pits. The professor moved with a slow, deliberate patience that was hypnotizing the entire class into a coma. Alden had secretly nicknamed Professor Vrigg the living footnote because he was just that boring. "And so," Vrigg buzzed, gesturing with a branch-like limb toward a flickering hologram, "we observe the same predictable pattern. When a species allows its aggression to run unchecked, it inevitably collapses in on itself, much like a dying star." He went down a list of extinct species, the geish, the seal, the eldarim, all just cautionary tales in a dusty textbook. Alden heard some rustling from the other students. There were bird-like velari, shimmering, formless glibs, and a few rock-skinned hermites. Alden fought back a yawn. He'd heard this lecture 100 times before. It seemed every advanced race in the galaxy loved to preach about peace, conveniently after they'd already conquered everyone around them. But the most telling example, Vrigg continued, with what Alden could only assume was a sense of drama, is the tragic downfall of the Terrans. Alden's head shot up. The boredom instantly evaporated, replaced by a surge of cold dread. A new image blinked onto the hologram, some artist's nightmarish interpretation of a human. It was a hulking, ape-like creature with a mouthful of fangs, splotchy green skin, and tiny glowing red eyes. It was holding a massive club that looked suspiciously like a giant thigh bone. "The Terrans," Vrigg said, drawing out the word, or humans as they referred to themselves, were a textbook case of a hyper-aggressive species. Their entire civilization was founded on violence. The hologram changed to a grainy old picture Alden vaguely recognized, a monster truck absolutely flattening a row of smaller cars. According to the single probe that ever managed to return, Vrigg lectured, this was their primary war ritual. The dominant tribe would construct a giant metal beast, which our probe identified as a mangler, and use it to destroy symbols of their rivals. Their main method of communication was simply screaming at one another at the top of their lungs. A bird-like student sitting behind Alden let out a terrified little peep. Alden felt a bizarre bubble of laughter rising in his chest, but it got caught in his throat. This wasn't just wrong. It was completely unhinged. Their society was a chaotic mess of constant warfare and strange acts of self-destruction, Vrigg continued, completely absorbed in his ridiculous theory. They poisoned their own atmosphere and depleted their natural resources. But the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate evidence of their savagery, came from that probe's last transmission. He paused for dramatic effect. The probe was damaged upon landing, and the Terrans swarmed it. "Its final log entry is garbled, but the message is clear," Vrigg went on. "It registered being disassembled. Its repair nanites activated, but the primitive software logged the event as consumption by local fauna. The Terrans ate the probe." A wave of gasps swept across the room. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "They ate a sentient machine," Vrigg stated, his voice flat with certainty. "This is the ultimate sign of a species doomed to extinction. We believe they wiped themselves out in a massive global war shortly after. A messy, brutal end for a messy, brutal people." Vrigg stood there, soaking in the stunned silence, clearly proud of his big reveal. The sheer, overwhelming stupidity of it all was making it hard for Alden to breathe. A monster truck rally was a war ritual? Humans ate a metal probe? He imagined a bunch of cavemen gnawing on titanium plating, and a laugh finally escaped him. He quickly smothered it and slowly, deliberately, raised his hand. But Vrigg just shot him a dismissive glance, obviously intending to ignore him and finish his grand finale. Alden sighed. It looked like being polite wasn't going to cut it. He cleared his throat, and his voice cut through the silent hall. Excuse me, but we're still around." For 3 long seconds, absolute silence. The words just hung in the air. Then, as if on cue, 100 alien faces whipped around to stare at him in pure, unfiltered shock. A student made of solid rock actually passed out, crashing to the floor with a heavy thud. A gelatinous glib let out a high-pitched shriek and dissolved into a terrified, shimmering puddle. The bird alien behind Alden screeched and scrambled over her desk, feathers puffed out in total panic. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Students were trampling one another to get away from him, away from the monster sitting in the front row. Professor Vrigg was frozen stiff, making a high-pitched whining sound like cracking wood, the sound of his entire academic career crumbling into dust. Alden didn't budge. He just sat there as campus security, 2 huge armored guards, smashed through the doors with their plasma rifles drawn. They took in the stampede, and then they saw him, sitting all alone, looking about as dangerous as a guy who had just missed his bus. He slowly put his hands up, feeling more exhausted than scared. Well, he thought to himself, this is going to create a mountain of paperwork. The observation room they stuck him in was surprisingly peaceful, with soft white walls and a single chair that molded to his body like warm clay. He was now a living exhibit, titled Extinct Species Found. Every few hours, a slot in the wall would hum open and deliver a bowl of flavorless beige protein paste and a bottle of water. They'd given him a data tablet filled with thousands of years of painfully dull alien poetry, and a game that involved sorting shapes based on their emotional state. He was getting surprisingly good at identifying a depressed dodecahedron. He was about halfway through his 3rd serving of beige goo when the wall chimed and shimmered, transforming into a video screen. It was the bird-like student from his class, Talia. "You," she chirped, her voice coming through his translator implant. "You are the Terran." "The name's Alden Renner," he said, pushing the bowl of paste away. "And you're Talia," she responded, her crest feathers fluttering with nervous energy. "I wanted to apologize for everyone's reaction. That was hardly an academic response." "It's all right," Alden said with a small smile. "I imagine it's not every day your history lesson decides to talk back." A series of quick clicks came from her, which his implant translated as laughter. "True," she said. "I've been reviewing the security logs for your room. The lockdown is quite comprehensive. And yet you managed to place a call to me. You're on the university's academic network, aren't you?" Alden just grinned. This might actually get interesting. The university's computer system had an old backdoor designed for data sharing, a tiny flaw they never bothered to fix. Bypassing it had been a fun little challenge. "Happy to be your walking, talking paradox," Alden said wryly. Talia leaned closer to her screen, her eyes focused on him. "May I ask some questions? Your biology seems to be in direct opposition to the official historical accounts." "Shoot. Is your jaw powerful enough to crush processed metal alloys?" Alden deadpanned. "No, I get sufficient iron from leafy greens and the occasional steak. This is incredible. The records claim your species communicates through ritualized screaming. Is your current mode of speech a recent development, or were the original probes just mistaken?" "Let's go with fundamentally, catastrophically mistaken." "And the mangler, the giant metal creature used for ritual combat?" "That was a monster truck rally," Alden explained, rubbing his forehead. "It was just entertainment. People would drive these huge modified trucks over old junked cars. They were loud and kind of silly, and for the most part, nobody got hurt." Talia's crest feathers twitched as she processed this new information. After a long pause, she finally said, "The discrepancy between the accepted Terran myth and your testimony is statistically astounding. This is a bombshell. To be honest, nothing this exciting has happened on this campus in my entire life," she chirped, her voice suddenly electric with energy. "Professor Vrigg's entire career is built on the Terran myth. You just demolished his life's work in one sentence." "I was just trying to sit through a boring lecture," Alden sighed. "The administration is going to bury this. They'll try to discredit you, call you a genetic anomaly, or maybe even an elaborate hoax from a rival university. They can't allow a contradiction of this magnitude to stand," she said, her expression turning serious. "I can help you. In academics, the truth is what matters most." "Help me how?" "I have access to the university's primary data archives," Talia said. "Every last one of them. We'll locate the original survey data, the report that spawned this whole Terran monster myth. We're going to find out what really happened." Alden looked at her bright, intensely curious face. Here he was, trapped and alone on an alien world, with the entire galaxy thinking he was some kind of savage monster. A brilliant, nosy alien academic was probably the best friend he could have asked for. "Okay, Talia Shavine," he said, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he smiled. "Let's go digging." Administrator Flisk, a mid-level manager from the Gloop Clip species, knew his morning was officially in the toilet. A Priority 1 Red Alert case file had just slammed onto his main data pad with the force of a supernova. The impact made the pad vibrate so hard it knocked over his third cup of hot keist for the shift. He was a short, six-limbed creature, like a hyper-caffeinated otter got into a fight with a spider and they both lost. Four of his limbs juggled various data pads, a fifth clutched his now-spilled drink, and the sixth was busy scratching a permanently stressed-out patch of fur behind his head. The file's title was a special kind of bureaucratic hell: Species Status Inquiry. Terran Designation, Pre-Warp Quarantine. 4. Cross-reference, University Security Incident 84 Gamma. Flisk's fur stood straight up. Quarantine 4? That file was so old it probably had digital dust on it. The protocol was brutally simple. Aggressive pre-warp species. Do not approach, do not engage, allow to self-destruct. Official regulations demanded these files stay buried deep in the archives. They were the administrative equivalent of a toxic waste dump. You know it's there, but you never, ever poke it with a stick. With a low groan, he used a free limb to tap the file open. The thing was a digital disaster zone, a mess of ancient scanner data, conflicting notes, and so many red warning flags they practically blinded him. The main report was the panicked message from a Mark III survey drone. Flisk physically shuddered. Mark IIIs were legendary for their glitches and laughably bad translation software. They were the whole reason for Regulation 11B. Always send your best gear for a first impression. This report was flagged for everything: biohazard, extreme aggression, unpredictable tech, and his personal favorite, sentient machinery, high risk of consumption. The last official entry from a living person was 93 standard years ago. A chime from his comm unit interrupted his dread. The face of his boss, Chief Administrator Plor, materialized. Plor was an Earmite, and his face, a collection of calm, fleshy folds, had all the expressive warmth of a geology textbook. "Flisk," Plor's voice rumbled. "You got the file." "Yes, Chief, the file has graced my desk with its soul-crushing presence," Flisk squeaked out, his voice a series of high-pitched chirps. "It appears we've somehow misplaced an entire species of machine-eating monsters." "We have misplaced nothing," Plor corrected, his voice like two mountains slowly grinding together. "We have an administrative error. A student at Akkad University is claiming to be one of them." "A student?" Flisk's voice went up another octave. "How does a creature from a level 4 quarantine planet enroll at a university? Did he fill out Form 79 Delta? Was it notarized? Because the paperwork alone for a quarantine species is an absolute nightmare." "That," Plor said, "is what you are going to find out. The Cultural Outreach Initiative got an application from a new spacefaring species in the Sol system. Standard stuff. The problem is, they processed it without cross-referencing the Threat Containment Division's quarantine list, because the two departments are running on ancient, incompatible software. It's an issue that's been ignored since the last budget cut 400 years ago. Flisk could feel a migraine starting behind all four of his eyes. Of course. Of course that's why. It gets better, Plor rumbled on. The official monitor for the Sol system, the one parked way out in their Oort cloud, has been filing the same automated no significant changes report every single week for the last 93 years. So let me get this straight. I have to figure out how the galaxy's scariest boogeyman got into college, and why our watchdog out there has been napping for nearly a century, Flisk summarized, his voice completely flat. Handle it, Plor commanded, and keep it quiet. The higher-ups are terrified this could turn into a massive public relations disaster. The connection cut. Flisk stared at the cursed file. He downed his lukewarm keist in one long gulp, the liquid barely registering. He was going to need something much stronger. This wasn't just a case file, it was a multi-departmental, galaxy-spanning festival of failure, and he was standing right in the middle of the blast zone. With a deep sigh that rustled his entire body, he put his other datapads on autopilot and dedicated all of its limbs to the Terran file. This was going to be a very long day. Alden sat across from a panel of university deans. The room was small, dark, and had the distinct smell of old books and silent judgment. Professor Vrigg stood off to the side, looking like a grumpy gargoyle and radiating waves of anger. "So you are sticking with this story," the head dean, an Amite named Dean Olin, said. Her voice sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. "You claim you are a human from the planet Earth." "That's where I was born," Alden said, keeping his voice even. "I've got the birth certificate on file to prove it." "Documents can be forged," Vrigg snapped, his voice vibrating with rage. "This is clearly a stunt, a sad attempt at fame by pretending to be part of a dead species. I demand a full biological workup. We need to confirm his freakish and no doubt engineered nature." Alden leaned forward. "With all due respect, Professor, your entire theory about my people comes from one single terrified report from centuries ago. One data point isn't a pattern, it's an anecdote." "It was a verified compact survey," Vrigg yelled back. "A Mark III survey, right?" Talia's crest feathers suddenly twitched. Weren't those the models that were famous for seeing sensor ghosts and mistaking dust storms for civilizations? How many sentient gas clouds did the compact try to offer trade deals to because a Mark III misread a weather balloon? A couple of the deans shuffled awkwardly in their seats. The whole Mark III debacle was a famously embarrassing period in the compact's history. And this probe, Alden pushed on, it landed in what was basically a pre-industrial town. If you thought a planet was full of monsters, would you send your best diplomats? Or would you send a cheap, twitchy, half-broken drone? Dean Olin steepled her large, stone-like fingers. "The student has a valid point about the data's integrity. The source is questionable." "Questionable?" Vrigg's voice squeaked. "It is the foundational text on predatory species. It is a single, unverified report from a notoriously unreliable piece of equipment." Olin cut her off, her tone final. "We are tabling your request for an invasive scan, Professor. The subject is now under the jurisdiction of the Galactic Compact. Their investigators are taking over." Vrigg looked like he was about to explode into a million angry pieces. He let out a low, furious buzzing sound. "Procedure must be followed," Olin rumbled. She fixed her rocky gaze on Alden. "Security will escort you to your dorm. You are not to have contact with anyone outside this university until the compact representatives arrive. Understood?" "Understood," Alden said. Two guards led him out of the room. As he walked by Talia, one of her crest feathers gave a very specific flicker. He got the message loud and clear. "Phase 1 is a go. The chaos is spreading just like we planned." It was a small win, but it felt huge. He had just put a crack in the foundation of galactic bureaucracy, which was pretty much a revolutionary act. After 5 days of being watched, they finally let him make a supervised call home. The faster-than-light connection had this awful, multi-second delay that made it feel like they were shouting at each other from opposite sides of a canyon. Still, seeing his parents' worried, pixelated faces on the screen was the best thing he'd seen all week. "Alden, are you okay?" his mother asked, her voice arriving a few seconds after her lips moved. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, trying his best to smile. "The room is actually really nice. The food's a little bland, though, kind of like staying in a five-star hospital that's trying way too hard to be minimalist." "Your father told me what you said in your last message," she replied. "He thinks it's funny." Right on cue, his dad's grinning face popped into the frame. "Funny? It's hysterical! So you're telling me these big, tough aliens think we're a bunch of extinct space monsters who eat kitchen appliances for fun?" "Something like that," Alden confirmed, the audio lag making it all feel like a weird dream. "And you decided to just tell them we're still here?" his dad's voice crackled through. The video showed him slapping his knee, roaring with laughter. "That's my boy, causing an interstellar incident." "Robert, this isn't funny." He heard his mom scolding his dad a moment later. "He's being detained." "It's more like concerned observation, Mom," Alden said, trying to reassure them. "They're not angry. They're just really, really confused." He did his best to explain everything. The class lecture, the monster truck rally video, the dead alien monitor. The whole story sounded even crazier saying it out loud across light years. His mother's smile was gone. "The government called the real diplomats. They're on their way." "They said it's a delicate situation," Alden said quietly. "I know. I'll be careful." "You'd better be," she said, her voice cracking a little. "Just be safe, sweetie." "I will, Mom. I love you guys." "We love you too, son." His dad's voice, stripped of all its usual humor, cut through the speaker. "Go get him, kid. Metaphorically, of course." The connection died, and the sterile white room fell silent again. Alden stared at the wall where his parents' faces had been just a moment before, feeling a million miles from home. He was just a student, a kid. And now, the entire future of the human race was resting on his shoulders, all because he got bored and spoke up in a lecture. Meanwhile, 3 shifts and a dangerously high dose of a coffee stimulant later, Administrator Phyllis felt the fur on his neck stand on end as he stared at a glowing red flag on his screen. He'd been tearing through the digital guts of the Sol system monitoring station, and he'd finally found it. The station, a tiny robotic outpost in the Oort cloud, had been sending the same no significant changes report to the Threat Containment Division every week for 93 years. It was perfect, reliable, except for one tiny detail. Its life support had catastrophically failed 53 years ago. For over half a century, that same little outpost had also been screaming a weekly emergency alert, life support offline message into the void. But according to Regulation 8B/9, a piece of bureaucratic genius, no alert could be escalated without an on-site living person confirming it. So the system just kept filing the emergency alerts as low-priority maintenance tickets. And the recipient of those tickets? The station's single occupant, the dead monitor. "You cannot be serious," Phyllis whispered, his many eyes wide with disbelief. For 50 years, the system had been spamming a dead guy's inbox with frantic emails about his own death. At the same time, a totally separate program, doing its own thing, kept sending the "everything's fine" report that the higher-ups actually read. It was a flawless, self-contained circle of epic failure. Phyllis had to see it with his own eyes. He requisitioned the fastest probe from the nearest patrol fleet, slapping so many high-priority codes on it that the sector's supply officer probably had a heart attack. Hours later, the video feed crackled to life. The probe glided silently toward the old station's viewport. Its external lights flashed on, cutting through the pitch-black interior. And there he was, floating in the zero-G command center. The monitor, a vril, long dead, perfectly preserved in the freezing vacuum of space. He was a dried-out husk, with skin stretched like parchment over his bones, forever facing his console. One bony finger was frozen less than a millimeter away from the send report key. He must have been moments from filing his weekly update when the oxygen just vanished. Phyllis stared at the grim sight of the dead monitor, eternally stuck at his post. He took a long, slow drink of his stim. Then, he opened a new report. Status update, Terran file. Inside, he typed a single sentence, visual confirmation of monitoring oversight is attached. He dragged the probe's image into the file, addressed it directly to Chief Administrator Vorn and every single department head involved, and hit send. All across the galactic capital, 1,000 data slates chimed in unison. The galactic government, a machine that hadn't moved faster than a glacier for centuries, suddenly ground to a horrified, screeching stop. A week after Phyllis's report sent the whole compact into a meltdown, Ambassador Huxley arrived. She was exactly what Alden pictured a human diplomat to be, sharp, professional, dressed in an impeccable suit, and looking completely and totally overwhelmed. Within an hour, she and her team had transformed his boring containment cell into a pop-up embassy, moving with a crisp, practiced efficiency. "Alden," she said, her voice steady as she reviewed a data slate, "we've read your statement to the university. It was certainly passionate." "They believe we literally eat scrap metal," Alden shot back, pacing the floor. "I thought passionate was putting it mildly." "Diplomacy is a careful dance," Huxley replied, not looking up from the screen. "It takes patience, subtlety. We have to present ourselves as peaceful and reasonable. The official plan is to apologize for the misunderstanding, highlight our desire for peaceful relations, and apply for a probationary membership in the compact." Alden froze. Apologize? What are we apologizing for? For surviving. And for the clerical mistake that allowed you to enroll without being properly vetted, she said without missing a beat. "We'll accept blame for the paperwork. It's a sign of goodwill. It makes us look reasonable." "It makes us look weak," Alden argued, his hands balling into fists. "They have this myth that we're monsters, and now the monster is knocking on the front door asking to be let in. It proves their point. They'll just assume it's a trick." "That's a chance we have to be willing to take," Huxley said, finally meeting his gaze, her expression unyielding. "This is the procedure, Alden. We take it slow. We earn their trust. We don't make a scene." Before Alden could protest, a soft chime echoed through the room. A glowing holographic scroll materialized in the air. "An official summons," Huxley stated as she read it. For the first time, her professional mask slipped and tiny stress lines formed around her eyes. "What's wrong?" Alden asked. "The story about the dead monitor. It got out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The entire galaxy now knows the compact lost track of an entire species for a century because they messed up. They're freaking out." Huxley shook her head. "No, they're spinning it. To save face, they're calling a special tribunal in the Grand Chamber. They're changing the narrative from their colossal screw-up to an evaluation of the emerging Terran threat." She looked at Alden, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They're putting all of humanity on trial, and they want you to be the star witness." "This is actually fantastic for us," Talia chirped, her feathered crest twitching with excitement. They were hidden away in a secure study room at the university library, surrounded by shimmering walls of ancient data. The news of the trial had thrown the campus into chaos, but for Talia, it was the ultimate research project. "How is any part of this good?" Alden groaned, raking a hand through his hair. "I'm about to be interrogated by a council of aliens who think I'm basically a wild animal." "Because you've flipped the board," she explained, her sharp talons flying across a data sleeve. "This isn't an academic discussion anymore. It's politics. If the compact is going to judge humanity based on our history, then we have every right to hold them to the same standard." "You want to dig up some dirt on the council," Alden realized. "I want to uncover historical truth," Talia corrected him primly. "The compact is so proud of how enlightened and peaceful they are now. but 1,000 years is a very, very long time. You don't become a galactic superpower by asking nicely, Alden muttered. They've just had more centuries to hide the evidence and rewrite the history books. Her access to the university's archives was a key to unlocking galactic history. Sure, the compact had sealed the really juicy files behind thick layers of security, but Talia wasn't looking at the files themselves. She was looking at the empty spaces around them. "Look here," she said, pointing a slender claw at a line of text. "This is a famous Ekalan history about their first steps into space. It mentions the Gahnarl consolidation, a time of massive expansion. The footnotes for this whole chapter list a dozen sources, and every single one of them is sealed. The files were locked up tight. Compact Security Mandate 8.4. "They're hiding something big," Alden said. "Obviously," Talia chirped, her claws making soft clicking sounds. "But even when you paint over something, it still leaves a bump in the wall." She cross-referenced the dates of the consolidation with old planetary climate surveys. "See," she said, 6 rival Aten hive worlds all show evidence of a sudden, total ecological collapse, all within the same 50-year window. That's exactly the kind of devastation you'd see from a world seed, a terraforming bomb that wipes out the local life to plant a new ecosystem." Alden's jaw dropped. They turned their enemies into forests. "It's a very solid hypothesis," Talia said, clicking her throat in satisfaction. They kept digging, moving on to the history of Talia's own people, the Valari, and a period known as the Sky Purge. The official records called it a heroic effort to stop a fast-spreading agricultural plague. But when they cross-referenced it with sealed medical archives, they found the plague was actually a specially designed metal salt. It was completely harmless to aliens, but for any species that lived on the planet's surface, it caused permanent sterility. A dark pattern began to emerge, convenient secrets, perfectly timed plagues, and rivals who just mysteriously disappeared. For every single species on that council, they found a skeleton in the closet, a version of history with holes big enough to fly a freighter through. Alden just kept taking notes, not even sure how he was going to use any of this. He gripped his stylus so hard his knuckles turned white, staring at the growing list of horrors they had erased from their past. Imagine being put on trial for the crimes of your entire species. That's the nightmare Alden Renner was living. He was supposed to be a student, a diplomat, a bridge between worlds. Instead, the galactic news networks had turned him into a sideshow freak, the living fossil from a barbaric planet. Day and night, camera drones buzzed outside his window, their lenses fixed on his every move. He'd unwillingly become the galaxy's #1 reality TV star. His analyst, Talia, showed him the feeds, and it was a complete circus. One channel had cheesy actors in terrible monster costumes, growling as they chewed on fake spaceship props. On another, conspiracy theorists were screaming that he was a genetically engineered super soldier, the first wave of a secret invasion from Earth. A stuffy academic named Professor Vrigg was making the rounds on all the scholarly channels, ranting about hoaxes and the end of academic truth. But a different kind of movement was starting to bubble up from the noise. It was small, mostly made up of college kids, rebels, and other species who were already fed up with the council's old-fashioned ways. They organized small protests, projecting Alden's face onto massive city buildings with slogans like, "History is a dialogue, not a death sentence," and "My ancestors ate mud, too." Public opinion is split right down the middle, Talia pointed out, tilting her head. You're either the monster of the week or the victim of the century. There's really no in-between. Ambassador Huxley just told him to ignore it all. "It's all just background noise," she insisted, though her voice was tight with stress. "The only opinions that matter are the ones inside the grand chamber." But it was his face on every screen. And it wasn't just Alden Renner, the kid from Earth, anymore. It was the face of humanity. Every word he would say, every tiny gesture he would make, would be taken as the official statement for his entire race. The weight of 8 billion lives, past, present, and future, was settling on his shoulders, and he felt like he was about to collapse. Meanwhile, in a quiet office worlds away, Administrator Filk typed the final sentence of his report. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. The report was a masterwork of dreamy, factual, and utterly damning evidence. It detailed, in excruciating detail, decades of epic failures, a monitoring station's broken systems, automated error reports that had been sent to a dead man's inbox for years, and a complete breakdown of communication between the departments of cultural outreach and threat containment. The report listed the budget cuts that allowed critical databases to decay and the domino effect of tiny mistakes that had avalanched into one colossal screw-up. He wrote it all in perfectly neutral language, letting the facts themselves scream the accusations off the page. His official recommendation was simple, and he was sure, totally useless. Item 1. Issue a full posthumous reprimand to Monitor Volto for complete operational failure. Item 2. Issue a system-wide reprimand to every department involved for gross negligence. Item 3. Offer a formal, unconditional apology to the human species for a century-long monitoring disaster and the horribly botched first contact that followed. He was pretty sure the council would just shred it. The trial was already set. They had their scapegoat. A big public spectacle was always more appealing than quiet, boring reform, and admitting you were wrong was basically against the law in the Galactic Compact. He double-checked the recipients, attached his digital signature, and hit send. On his screen, the little red icon for the Terran file, the one that had given him nightmares for weeks, flashed a peaceful green and then vanished into the archives. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, his desk was clear. Administrator Filk leaned back, feeling the tension drain from every muscle as a wave of pure exhaustion washed over him. He closed his eyes for just a moment and was instantly asleep, dreaming of clean inboxes and perfectly organized files. A week later, it was Judgment Day. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Compact wasn't designed to inspire you. It was designed to break you. It was a massive, hollowed-out bowl made of non-reflective black stone, so vast that you couldn't even see the far side through the gloom. Hundreds of pods, one for each member species, floated in silent, tiered rings. It felt more like being inside a giant tomb than a courtroom. As Alden walked beside Ambassador Huxley, his footsteps echoed into the crushing silence. He could feel the pressure of thousands of eyes on him. It was a collective gaze of curiosity, fear, and utter disgust. He was a bug in a jar. High above, on a single platform in the very center of the chamber, sat the tribunal. It was led by the Catherian Concordant speaker, Asildra. She wasn't really a single being, but more like a walking, talking coral reef, a shifting pillar of what looked like fossilized bone. Her body was so matte black it seemed to drink the light, making her outline seem fuzzy and indistinct. When she moved, it was with the slow, grinding deliberation of a continent shifting, an ancient power stirring. Speaker Asildra raised a gavel of polished black stone and brought it down. The sound was a deep, soul-shaking thud that vibrated up from the floor and straight into Alden's bones. The trial of humanity had begun. Ambassador Huxley's opening statement was a masterwork of diplomacy. It was eloquent, it was perfectly reasoned, and it was completely and utterly pointless. She spoke of second chances, of the vital need for communication, and of the bright future humanity and the Compact could build together. The chamber remained absolutely silent. Alden looked around at the faces in the floating pods. Not one alien expression flickered. They were listening to her the way a biologist might listen to the meaningless chirps of a newly discovered insect. When she finished, Speaker Asildra leaned forward. The motion created a low, scraping sound, like tectonic plates grinding against each other. Her voice, when it finally came, was the same, a slow, heavy rumble that felt like it was being pulled from the planet's core. "We acknowledge your appeal to sentiment, Ambassador," Asildra grated, her tone dripping with what the universal translator could only describe as glacial condescension. However, the facts remain. The Compact identified the Terran species as a high-aggression threat. Your own historical records, as incomplete as they are, confirms centuries of non-stop warfare among yourselves. We have evolved beyond that, Huxley argued, her voice cracking under the strain. We learned from our past mistakes. Did you? Isildur rumbled back. Our data shows you colonized every solid world in your home system in less than 3 of your centuries. That is a rate of expansion that indicates unchecked ambition. It is a pattern identical to the early stages of every fallen empire this compact has been forced to discipline. Huxley tried to explain, to give them context about the Cold War, the space race, the simple human drive to explore. But her words were like water on stone. They just rolled off the tribunal's wall of absolute certainty. They weren't here to have a discussion. They were here to confirm a verdict they'd already reached. They interpreted her politeness as deception, and her attempts to explain the nuances of history as a confession of guilt. Alden sat behind her, the knot in his stomach twisting tighter with every word she spoke. Someone discreetly passed him a data slate. It was Huxley's notes, talking points for him: emphasize peace, express regret for the misunderstanding, submit to the compact's superior wisdom. He glanced at the polite, useless words. Then he looked up at Speaker Isildra's ancient, unmoving face and knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were doomed. Huxley's approach was failing, hard. They were trying to argue with a mountain, and that mountain was about to fall on top of them. This tribunal has indulged the pleasantries of your chosen diplomat, Speaker Isildra boomed, dismissing Huxley with an almost imperceptible shift of her colossal body. Now, we will hear from the anomaly. Her blank, rock-like face swiveled to fix on him. The specimen, Alden Renner, will now approach the floor. The specimen. That single word struck him like a punch to the gut, a jolt of ice-cold clarity. All the fear, the frustration, and the impossible pressure of the past few weeks suddenly ignited into a single white-hot point of anger deep inside him. He rose to his feet, and on legs that felt surprisingly steady, began to walk toward the center of the chamber. The only sound in that gigantic room was the echo of his own shoes on the stone floor. He could feel Ambassador Huxley's worried stare on his back, but it was drowned out by the weight of 1,000 alien glares, 1,000 years of prejudice aimed right at him. He finally reached the circular platform directly below the council and looked up at the monolithic being called Speaker Isildra. He felt like one man standing at the base of a skyscraper. The stone creature leaned forward, the sound of grinding rock filling the air. "Tell us, human," she rumbled, her question already an accusation. "Why should we believe your kind is anything but the monsters your own history proves you to be?" This was it. The moment of truth. Alden glanced down at the data slate Huxley had given him. It was full of polite phrases, carefully worded apologies, and desperate pleas for mercy. He pictured himself reading those words, his voice getting lost in the vast, dead emptiness of the chamber, and he knew it would be a complete waste of breath. It would be like politely asking a hurricane to change direction. He looked back up at Speaker Isildra's ancient, unreadable face. Her mind was already made up. The other council members were just as cold, their expressions practically dripping with judgment. This wasn't a trial. It was a formality before an execution. And in that moment, something inside him settled. His breathing became even. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. If he was going to go down, he was going to go down fighting. Have you ever felt like the whole world was against you? Well, imagine the entire galaxy is against you, and you're the only person who can speak up. That was my reality. I gently set the data pad on the floor. From the human delegations booth, I heard a collective, horrified gasp. I glanced over at Ambassador Huxley. Her face was a ghostly white sheet of pure panic. But then our eyes met, and she gave me the smallest, most imperceptible nod. That one little gesture said it all. It was a white flag. It was permission. It said, "Go get 'em, kid. We're toast anyway." I took a deep breath, staring right at the spot where Speaker Isildra's eyes would be, if she had any. I let the silence stretch out, making them wait, making them listen. You want to know why you should believe we're civilized? I asked, my voice echoing, sharp and clear. The better question is, why should we believe you are? A wave of stunned silence rolled through the chamber. Nobody saw that coming. You demand I answer for my history, I pushed on, my voice getting louder. You want an apology for a history book that you all wrote? Fine, let's talk about that book. You wrote the masterclass on how to be monsters. You just shredded the chapters that made you look bad. The chamber erupted in fury, but I wasn't done. I ripped my eyes away from the speaker and scanned the floating pods, locking onto the delegation from OCAT. I saw Professor Vrigg, his bark-like skin practically vibrating with fury. You, I said, my voice cutting clean through the chaos. The Akatans. You give us lectures about our violent expansion. Your official records call it the Garo Consolidation, this so-called golden age when you peacefully brought your corner of the galaxy together. But here's a funny thing. Somebody has put a lock on every single original document from that era. Why would you do that? I pressed, not giving them a moment to think. What about the old planetary surveys Talia and I found? The ones you missed? They show that 6 different worlds had their entire ecosystems artificially wiped and replaced in just 50 years, right around the time your biggest rivals just disappeared. Your consolidation wasn't about unity. You smothered their planets with a bioweapon that rewrote their DNA, turning entire civilizations into silent forests. And you had the nerve to call it progress. The lights in the Akatan booth flickered and went dim. I then turned my attention to the Valori, Tally's people. And you? Your history books are full of stories about a noble sky purge that fought off some kind of blight. But they conveniently forget to mention that the blight was a man-made poison that only sterilized species that lived on the ground. You committed mass genocide with fertilizer. What a neat coincidence, huh? A quiet, angry rustling sound came from the Valori as they all shifted their feathers. Finally, I looked back at the main stage, back to the silent, stone-faced judge. And you, Speaker Eldra, and your people, the Catharians. Everyone praises your wisdom and your patience. You've been around for millions of years. But you used to have neighbors, right? What happened to the sentient gas clouds of your sister planet? Your history books are suspiciously simple about that. They just say the clouds went quiet. You didn't even try to come up with a good lie. You just waited long enough for everyone to forget they were ever there. For the first time, the speaker's slow, constant swaying stopped cold. She was perfectly still. The mountain was actually paying attention. This isn't a contest to see who was worse, I boomed, and the angry muttering died down. That's not the point at all. I held up my hands trying to look peaceful, which felt pretty ridiculous after the bombshells I'd just dropped. The point is, every single one of you has a dark past you need to answer for. You're just older. You've had more time to bury the evidence and write yourselves into the hero role. I paused, letting my voice drop a little. Yes, humanity fought horrific wars. We did unspeakable things to each other. We built bombs that could crack our own world open. We choked our skies and poisoned our oceans. We nearly drove ourselves to extinction a dozen times. We know exactly what we are, because our history is a fresh wound we look at every single day. We teach it to our children. We build entire museums to honor our greatest failures. We carry that guilt with us, a constant, painful reminder of what we're capable of, so we can fight like hell to be better than we were yesterday. I looked back at the silent speaker and the whole assembly. You all have the exact same scars. You just got better at pretending you can't see them. You cover them up with fancy robes and call it wisdom. You sit here judging us for a past we're actively trying to heal from, while you live in a present built on a past you won't even acknowledge. The chamber was dead silent. My words hung in the air like a physical weight. So here's your choice. You can work with a flawed, scarred, but honest species to try and build a better future for everyone. Or you can keep sitting on your thrones built on forgotten bones, judge us for having a history you can still see, and prove to the whole galaxy that you're the exact same monsters you pretend you outgrew. The choice is yours. I was finished. The words bounced off the walls and faded into a vast, ringing silence. I just stood there, breathing hard, my hands balled into fists. The adrenaline faded, leaving me feeling shaky and empty. I did it. I actually yelled at the mountain, but the silence that came after was different. It wasn't just quiet. It was thick with shock and a dawning sense of shame. 1,000 years of comfortable self-righteous beliefs had just been shattered in a few minutes. I had held up a mirror, and nobody in that room liked the reflection staring back at them. Speaker Eldra stared at me for what felt like a lifetime. The living mountain was completely still. Then, with a slow, grinding noise, she lifted her gavel of polished black rock. She brought it down with a deep, echoing boom. "This tribunal is in recess." Her voice was flat. The smug, condescending tone was gone. It was just heavy. She turned, a movement that took an eternity, and glided away from the stage. The mountain had walked away. I stumbled back to the human booth, my legs feeling like overcooked noodles. Ambassador Huxley was just gaping at me, her mouth wide open, her entire diplomatic career up in flames. She looked at me with a wild mix of absolute terror and total awe. Miles away, back at her university, Talia Shavine watched the whole broadcast live. Her crest feathers flared out in a brilliant display of color. I hadn't just defended my species. I had just offered a brand new, terrifying, and unbelievably compelling theory about the entire galaxy, and in doing so, I had changed everything. We were escorted to a plush waiting room, a fancy cage to keep us in until the verdict was announced. Ambassador Huxley paced back and forth, her eyes glued to the wall. "You either just saved our entire species," she said, her voice strained, "or you just signed all of our death certificates." "Felt like it was worth a shot," I mumbled, collapsing into a soft chair, completely out of gas. Before Huxley could say anything else, the door chimed and slid open. A young Akatan diplomat walked in. You could tell he was young. His bark-like skin still had a youthful shine. His eyes were fixed on me. He walked right up to me and performed a stiff, formal bow. "Your words," the Akatan buzzed softly, "had significant merit. My people have been silent about the consolidation for generations. Perhaps it is time we finally talked about it." He placed a data pad on the table in front of me. "This is a preliminary proposal for a technological and cultural exchange, assuming your species is still around for such things." He bowed again and left just as quickly as he'd come. Huxley stared at the datapad like it was a poisonous snake. The door chimed again. This time, it was a Valari scholar. Her crest feathers were arranged in a pattern of deep respect. She wanted to debate the ethics of interacting with less advanced civilizations and the philosophy of generational guilt. She was followed by an envoy from the Glib Glibs, who scurried in, gave a frantic bow with all four of his arms, and formally apologized for an unfortunate clerical error on his government's part. As a personal apology, he offered me a lifetime supply of his planet's best coffee beans. One after another, a small parade of delegates came through, each one looking at us with a new, cautious curiosity. My speech hadn't won us a bunch of friends, not yet, but it had earned us something much more important: respect. I had forced them to see humanity not as some monster to be feared, but as a mirror to be looked into. The galactic wall of prejudice was still standing, but I had just put about 1,000 cracks in it. When Speaker Ildra finally called the tribunal back into session, the entire mood in the Grand Chamber had changed. The icy silence was gone, replaced by a low buzz of conversation from the floating pods. The air of arrogant certainty had evaporated, leaving behind a thick fog of uncomfortable self-reflection. Imagine facing a trial for the crime of being human. That's where I was, one man in a massive hall filled with alien judges who had already made up their minds that my people were a galactic menace. The head judge, Sildra, was as still as a mountain, but for the first time, I thought I could see a tiny crack in her stone-cold confidence. When she finally spoke, her voice was a deep rumble, but her words sent a shockwave through the room. "This tribunal has re-evaluated the evidence presented," she grated. The other council members, the Catharians, didn't even bother to hide their annoyance. In light of new arguments suggesting certain blind spots in our own histories, this body is reclassifying the Terran situation. The chamber fell silent. This issue is no longer a security threat, but an administrative review. She raised her gavel. The charges of preemptive aggression against the Terran species are hereby dropped. Their delegation and vessel are released. Ambassador Huxley finally let out a week's worth of held breath, but the lead counselor wasn't done. Furthermore, by a unanimous vote, this council extends to the species known as humanity a provisional membership in the Galactic Compact. This will be followed by a period of cultural integration and mutual observation. It wasn't a complete win, but it was a start. They were in, even if it was on probation. A tidal wave of pure exhaustion crashed over Alden. Weeks later, he found himself walking back into the massive amphitheater for his History 301 class. Life was slowly inching back toward something that felt normal. He was still kind of a big deal on campus, but now the curious stares were replaced with nods of respect. He'd even heard that his old professor, the one who insisted humans were nothing but barbarians, had suddenly taken a long-term sabbatical to, and I quote, reevaluate his core thesis. A new professor stood at the podium now, a young and vibrant Valari with eyes sparkling with curiosity. On the giant screen behind her, the day's lesson glowed. Humanity, a case study in reevaluating history and the perils of a single narrative. Alden couldn't stop a small smile from spreading across his face. From the second row, Talia waved, holding a seat for him. He slipped in beside her just as the lecture began. "Think they'll get the story right this time?" she whispered, her bright crest feathers ruffling with amusement. "Who knows?" Alden whispered back, letting himself sink comfortably into his chair. "But at least it's a start." He glanced around the room, taking in all the different species from every corner of the galaxy, all gathered to learn the truth. He wasn't some strange creature in a zoo anymore, a living exhibit to be analyzed and judged. He was just a student among his peers, part of a story that was still unfolding. The future was guaranteed to be messy and probably involve a mountain of paperwork, but for the first time since he'd left Earth, it felt like it was his, like it belonged to all of humanity. And whatever was coming, he was ready for it.